So we are going to talk today about concise writing strategies. So if you've been to the previous webinars, there's a little bit of some of the same strategies as readability, because of course, concise writing and readable writing are very similar. And I mentioned earlier, but if you've just arrived, there's going to be some activities. And so if you have a pencil and a paper, or if you want to type it on your computer, you can do that. But I do encourage you to, when I give you a little activity to do, actually engage your brain and your pencil and try to do the activity. You get more out of it that way. Okay. So normally at the beginning of a webinar, I would give you a table of contents. And this time I'm not going to do that. There's basically one content, which is use fewer words. And we're going to do a series of worked problems to just see different ways to use fewer words. The first example, this is something that happened to me just recently, which is I belong to the European Association of Science Editors, and they put a call out and said, who wants to review a book? And I thought, oh, great, a free book. This will be fantastic. So I agreed. But there's a twist to this plot, not just to the very nice cover page. It's a massive book. I tried to fluff the pages out to show you. 742 pages, no fluff at all. It's that really dense kind of paper, but it's 74 chapters. Like, the contributor list alone is 9 pages. There's nothing concise about this book. It's a good book. Its strength is in its volume, but I had to write a 1-page review of 742 pages. And so how do you do a concise review and make it meaningful of 742 pages? As you can see, I achieved it. So the first thing, any piece of writing really, you want to sandwich it with a good hook and an excellent conclusion or call to action. So even if you didn't read what's in the middle of that 1 page, this tells you about the book, right? So a professional conference in a book, particularly suitable as a gift for any graduate or protege, but refreshing reading for more experienced professional scientists as well. And then at the end, I say, overall, this is the kind of book that would get many reads in a department office. So I'm summarizing it up. Okay, but a summary does not a good book review make. We need more than just a summary. So I summarized, categorized, and tabulated things, which we're going to look at in a bit. I first of all took the qualities of the book at the beginning, and then I went into some specific details. So I picked some really unique things about this book. For example, they had a prison psychologist talking about manipulation and manipulation in colleagues and equating it with prison colleagues, which you don't really think when you're thinking about a scientific career about that, but that's part of the strength of this book, is how cool some of the examples are. Another thing that was unusual was having a bunch of colleagues sit down and look at concept maps and flowcharts to rethink the strategy in a research group, which I also thought was pretty neat. So they go into all different kinds of details, and the point was that I used those specific examples and didn't just make a summary. So being concise isn't always just about, you want to be sure when you're concise to not make it too bland. You're not here to gray it out. You still want to make it exciting. So there you can see what the table was. So I chose these 5 categories, and I sort of, some of the chapters had similar topics. So these aren't necessarily the titles of all the chapters. Sometimes I had to, put 2 into one and sort of group it. So it's a synthesis task. So any concise writing is going to be a bit of a synthesis task. So we all know that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And as if we've just seen, a table can replace a whole lot of words too. See, the mouse is happy about that. There's no cat pictures in this presentation. I just wanted you to know in case some of you were waiting for it. There is, however, this picture. And this picture is quite amazing because it's worth, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of words. What it is a picture of the vice presidents of the United States. I did not make this image, by the way, and unfortunately I picked it up off the internet, so I don't know who made this image, but I really love how much they communicate with a picture and 4 boxes and 4 bullet pointed, really concise sentences. So, I mean, something I love about this is the boxes make you curious. You know, what is the red, blue, yellow, and green? Right away, before you even read the words, you're curious. And so that's the same function as the hook of that book review. It hooks you in and it makes you curious. And that's good writing, good teaching. It's good everything. If you can make your reader curious, they're going to stick with you. So this is the text that accompanied the, I think it was a Facebook post or a LinkedIn post. So it said, the USA is a young country with growing pains. And it says, see the red box? Until then, Kamala Harris would have been enslaved. So another thing that just to show you the structure of this list here, and something that makes it concise is it actually also has repetition. So you probably think that in concise, we would want to remove repetition. But the thing about repetition is that it's comfortable and it's readable. And so all of these things say, you know, red, blue, yellow, green. And then it says until then, until then, until then, until then. So if you take out the repetition, there's even fewer words here, and yet delivers quite a large message, you know, obviously about the advancement of women and just the profound, you know, looking at the ties over time, you know, just the fashion statements that you see. No, I'm just joking. But you know, of course, all those white men, and then we have a non-white woman, which is just fantastic. So Diane actually responded to my LinkedIn post and I said, does anybody have any questions for the Concise Writing webinar? And she had a great question. She said, what do you do when the client needs detail? So, you know, obviously in that image I just showed you, there's no detail. You would have to go dig further to find your own detail, right? So if you think your client needs detail, of course you spend days writing down all that detail, right? But how do you make the client actually take the time to read what you spent all those days writing? How do you even just get them to read emails past the first paragraph? And to be honest, I didn't have an answer to this, but less than an hour after Diane asked me this, another colleague wrote to me with the perfect answer. Sam Jean is a friend of mine who works at Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And I had just asked him for some sample reports for the technical writing courses. I like to have different kinds of samples. And he sent me this link to a report. So this is the first page. And again, we're going with that hook and that curiosity idea. So the first word, and if you're taking notes on this presentation, select is one of the words I really want to. So first of all, interest and an intriguing beginning, but also selecting the really important stuff. So it draws on 50 years of data. That's interesting. Obviously, it's about the birds of Canada, and here's the organizations that contributed. And then it gives us just a couple of details without belaboring the point. So populations of shorebirds, grassland birds, and aerial insectivores have rapidly declined, while waterfowl and bird populations have recovered from historical lows. That's interesting. Some of you might already be getting bored because I'm reading the paragraph in the presentation. So maybe you would just go to read the full report here, or if you're bored, you probably wouldn't, but there's more to this introduction. I cheated. I took this off. This is sitting right below the read the full thing here. So you don't even actually have to read the paragraph because this is what it looks like. So in fact, what you're probably going to read is the state of Canada's birds. Picture! Everybody loves a picture. And I can see that I don't have to read the sentence about shoreline birds, grassland birds, and aerial insectivores, because I can see these poor flying insect eaters right down here, 59% decreased, right? So I already, by looking at this image, get curious. You know, I think that I probably know that the grassland birds and the insectivores are declining because of pollution and pesticides, but I don't know why shorebirds are declining. And so that is enough to make me curious to want to read the full email or read the full report. And another very beautiful and I think compelling reason as to why people would continue to engage with this is that last line that I caught on the bottom there. For questions on this report, please contact. So automatically you have trust in this report because you know that if you have questions, there's someone you can follow up with. And so building that trust with your readers is going to build their motivation to read what you've written. So building, I didn't put the word trust in the bullet points, but it's definitely follow-up builds trust. Quiz time. Write down a few of the strategies that I've already suggested. And if there's any questions in the comments, then Marnie, you can tell me now.
Hi, Krista. No questions specific to the presentation. Okay. So I'm just sharing with people the past web links as well. So I'll Perfect. Let you know when questions come.
Cool. Okay, so quiz answers. So in that first book review, I said categorize and summarize, but select a few interesting examples. Use a table is a good way, and a hook conclusion sandwich to focus interest. So interest is a real key of being concise. Don't choose the boring words, choose the interesting words. Okay, in this one, we have a compelling image that again arouses interest, plain language, and that plain language involves a lot of repetition, and it involves color. And one of my people who tested this out with me said, what about for colorblind people? And that's actually a very good point, right? Because a colorblind person might not be able to see that this is red, blue, yellow, and green. So this is another reason why, let me show you on this graph. On a graph, it's really good if you can put your labels right beside the line. Because if we just said dark blue is waterfowl, purple is birds of prey, not everybody can see the blue and purple or see the difference between the two blues and the two purples. But even colorblind people can see the numbers and the birds that are right on the lines that way. So if you can form your figures this way to really think about readability and think about disabilities, that's really helpful. And so here again, you know, when I looked at this image, actually, when I first saw it online, I mean, I don't know the names of the presidents because I'm Canadian. I know who Biden is though, and I know who Pence is because I've been paying attention for that long. But if you, the first thing I was wondering is, I wonder what years are represented by the red, blue, yellow, and green. So that's another point about concise things. You have to choose what you're going to leave out. So whoever made this image chose, you know, what I can do is I can circle this picture and I can put the events. And, you know, the names of the vice presidents really aren't as important as the events. And even the years aren't as important. The point that is that we're showing progress. And that's the message that we get from this. So concise writing always involves leaving some things out. Oh, and I just repeated it here so that we could look at it. So, and you can see that actually there's only really a few words that are important. Enslaved, couldn't vote, segregated school, and couldn't have her own bank account. So it's just fascinating how few words you can get a big message across with. And then this one here, again, selecting those important points and not rambling on with garbage words. Okay, really choosing your important words. And compelling image. And of course, with the image, we didn't even need to look at the words very much. And then the follow-up contact for further information really builds trust. And I wanted to also use this slide to talk about telegraph style. So if you see here, number 1, I say select just the essential points. That's a full sentence. And then I say compelling image that arouses interest. And I very naughtily, that has a capital letter and a period, but that's not a full sentence. And so when you're doing bulleted lists, it's considered acceptable in many contexts to make telegraph style. So because it's a bulleted list, we know that we're not always accepting a full sentence. Strictly speaking, I shouldn't really be putting a capital in a period when it's not a full sentence. And so then the third one is a full sentence. Sometimes I like to show you a mistake just to show, look, I made a mistake, don't do that mistake. So I could have said, use a compelling image that arouses interest, but the words use a are not really adding value to this. And so I chose to do telegraph style. If you think through things, you'll probably get it right. The next example addresses the laborious procedure of high school registration in my neighborhood. And my neighborhood has a very low literacy level and about 30% poverty. And so many of the people who go to this high school and who need to use this have a low reading level, and they don't have very much practice reading. I have a cat spying on me through the window, attending the webinar. So these people don't have practice reading. So what this document that you're about to see uses is plain language again. So you keep it simple. It uses a lot of white space. It's maximum concise, and it's gamified to arouse interest. Because they don't have to just read it, they have to use it. So that's two different things, right? So look at this. This is actually quite intriguing, and it's totally usable. So if you're a grade 9 student, you already see right away where you're going to click, right? And then little helpful hints are in orange there. You know, your 3-year plan, need more help, fill out this form. So it's actually using full sentences and good English. The vice principal chose, you know, she could have chosen a larger font, but if she chose a larger font, there would be less white space. So you can always, you know, think about that. The fact that there's a lot of white space is partly what makes this so engaging. And it's very reassuring to think, I follow this path. So that's a very good way to do it. So minimum word count, again, selected that information very well. The procedure is very clear, and there's just a focus on the action. And it's fun because it looks like a board game. So pictures are good. You got that message. I'm sure that some of you came to talk about words. So the definition of plain language is that it uses words and design to, I'm really excited. I just noticed we have 227 people, which means we have twice from last time. That's really great. Okay, so plain language, do not add any words you do not need. So keep the language simple. Another way to say that even more simply, okay, the middle one, of course, has the problem that it's got negatives in it. So it's always going to be more concise. Again, if you're taking notes, write this down, word things positively. So use only the words you need. That's actually even better than saying don't use what you don't need. Use only what you do need. So a document with many long, elaborate words, long, elaborate sentences, and long, unbroken paragraphs is hard to read. By the way, so are obnoxious words, all in capitals. Avoid both. So those all capital words, which sometimes people use for emphasis, if you put too many of those on a page, you drop the reading level or increase the reading level. You make it more difficult to read considerably. Interesting. You want your reports to be easy for your clients to read and scan, so use the simplest sentence structures you can, particularly if the science is complex. This is obviously the opposite of readable, right? Hopefully you're already thinking of what you could select and what you could get rid of here. And hopefully some of you are already thinking, in fact, put it in the chat. What could be the quickest way to make this concise? The first thing that you would do. I'll wait till somebody gets a good answer in the chat. Hopefully someone will throw an answer in the chat.
Lots of answers coming in the chat. Can you see the chat, Krista, when you're sharing your screen?
Yep, I just figured it out.
Okay,
so
perfect.
bullet points, excellent. Yeah, bullets is what I was after. And somebody else said use the table, which would also be very good, and telegraph style. Excellent, and a diagram. Perfect. Okay. Now the opposite of this, I just want to make sure I didn't, hang on here. So the opposite of this is it's possible to be too concise and obscure your message. So everybody seems to have quickly got the idea that the bullet points are going to make it much shorter. What if I just did this? which is actually saying the same as the paragraph. So if you are a math person and you're used to looking at graphs and you know that that red line is a rising slope, and we use a line like that to mean that something is increasing in rate, then this short little diagram would be enough for you to really get the message. The more complex your topic, the less complex you want your sentences to be. This says the same as that big long paragraph if you're a math person. But if you're not a math person and you never look at graphs, then this is not going to make any sense at all. It's just going to look like two crossed lines on a page, and it's not going to make any sense. So then it failed to communicate, right? Now, if then statements are also very cozy for us mathy type people. And if then statements are going to get across to most types of people. It's just an added good boost for anybody who's suffered through math courses. So if your topic is more complex, then your sentences should be simpler. And so what I was trying to say about that, people suffering through math courses is a shared experience. And so when there's a shared experience, then people enjoy those words or enjoy the things that call back the shared experience. So that's another thing that gets people to engage with your documents. Okay, quiz time again. Here are some tips. They're good ideas, but they are not well written. So how could you improve these sentences? So you can either do these on your pen and paper. Some people might want to toss them in the chat, but that'll probably get too busy. So here are some tips. And actually, I already am talking about how could you improve these sentences. Improve is not very specific here. I didn't explain how I want you to improve them. So I want you to make these sentences more concise. If this was a different thing, if it was last webinar, I might be asking you to make them more persuasive, or maybe I would ask you to make them more detailed. So you need to be specific and clear with what you're asking by the way you choose your words. And another difference that I made from the last slide is that I changed the contraction to they are. Because they are, even though you might not think this is more concise, it is easier to read. So making everything into contractions to try to save words, like my son was doing for his high school essay the other day, is not a very good writing strategy in the real world. You can do it for your high school essays to save words, but please don't do it in real life. And so following on that topic of being specific, also, so I was saying, don't use the word improve unless it be more specific about what you mean by that. A lot of people also use this and that and they and it and them and the former and the latter, which we mainly used how to do that in English class. But in scientific documents, they often create confusion because we don't know what you're referring to when you say this. And it's exactly the same number of words to just repeat the thing that is this that you're talking about. So I think sometimes people use this and that because they're trying to not repeat themselves and they're trying to vary their words like their high school English teacher told them to do, but it's not a good strategy. It just creates confusion. Okay, so improve this tip by making it more concise. So short words are easier and quicker to read than long ones, and short sentences are easier and faster to read. The brain processes them faster. So just take 30 seconds or a minute and figure out what you would do with this sentence. And so somebody, just while you're doing that, Bridget points out she wanted a legend for the lines. And the reason to label it on the lines, I'm assuming you're talking about that bird graph, is it avoids the colorblind problem. So the legend can be a difficulty if you are colorblind because you won't necessarily know which purple is which. Okay, so we have some good answers. I'm also only half mathy. Better half mathy than not mathy at all. So here's one way we could do this. So short words and sentences are easier and quicker to read than long ones. So what we did is we took sentences here and we put it in here. And then quicker and faster are just synonyms, right? So we don't lose anything by pulling that into one sentence. And then I just kept the brain processes them faster. Okay. Long sentences tend to be more laborious, semicolon. The brain needs to hold data from each part of the sentence while processing additional data, which is a long and difficult process compared to the way it digests a collection of short sentences. So it's difficult to read that with one breath. And semicolons are kind of the enemy of concise writing because, I could have put long sentences tend to be more laborious, period. And then that creates one package of information here. Your brain forgets that, and then your brain goes to the next part of the sentence. But when you put a semicolon, your brain tries to hold the entire thing at once. And that's difficult. So this would be the plain language way to rewrite that. Long sentences are, we could even say they're hard work if we thought we would have people who don't know what laborious means. The brain needs to hold the entire sentence at once. The brain refreshes itself at the start of a new sentence. So I made new words here in this edit, right? I didn't discuss refreshing, but if it's a long and difficult process to not do it, then by translation, it's an easier process if you do it. Semicolons can often be replaced by periods. This makes shorter, easier sentences. Yes, I did go over that one. So what would you do with this one? I would just replace it with a period. So again, the reason we do this is it refreshes the brain. So if you are writing for an audience that reads plenty of scientific research all the time and they have a very quiet office, then maybe they can handle having these long semicolon sentences. But you will find that in a lot of scientific article writing, in fact, the more complicated the research that I'm editing for a journal, the more I will look for semicolons and shorten them into two sentences when possible. You usually do not lose the logical connection, which is generally the argument that people think they need the semicolon. So semicolons can often be replaced by periods. This makes shorter, easier sentences. These two pieces of logic still hold together just as well in that version as they do in the semicolon version, right? The same is true of your scientific writing. Now, there are some cases where that's not true. So just assume that you have about a handful of semicolons that you can use. And other than that, try to make the shorter sentences when it's possible. Okay, try this one. Double negatives are not just long, they're also not always easy to untangle. So do not use them. Also, it's more powerful to word things positively. How would you shorten that? I'll be quiet so you can give it a try.
Krista, while people are practicing that, there are some great
Questions?
comments in the chat that I thought you could catch up on about people saying goodbye to semicolons.
Yeah. And actually, Jerry Vandenberg, who also teaches tech writing in the same department, he and I were talking about them earlier this week because he likes semicolons a lot too. You can still use them for winky smileys. I'm perfectly okay with that. Oh, nice. Very good one. Positives are more powerful, shorter, and easy to untangle. Use them. Alexandra Roper, that is fantastic. Write sentences in a positive way rather than using double negatives. Okay. So here's one way we could go. Sentences written positively are concise. Have I lost anything when I write just sentences written positively are concise? Yes. I made it too concise, right? I lost, it's more powerful to word things positively. So again, the same as with that picture with the 4 colored squares, you have to choose how concise you're going to be. If you're working on a grant proposal where you only have 1 page, you might choose to lose that to get down to just one short line. Double negatives are long and difficult to untangle. Do not use them. Positive sentences have more power. That has all the same information, except I think Alexandra's was even more concise than this. Now, somebody wrote in the introduction that they were a law enforcement person and she's trying to write more passively now. So I wanted to mention right at this point that when you write passively, there are some good reasons for writing passively, but it takes a lot more words to write passively than actively. So the mouse here is not very smiley because passive language is not concise, and it also creates an unfriendly distance. Okay, and he's giving you a hot tip in the red text there, saying that many more words are required. So that word "are" is a version of the verb "to be." That tells us that there's passive language happening here. So if you're wondering if you have passive or active sentences, there's a number of strategies we can do, but one of them is right there. When you see the word "are" or "to be" or "is" or "was" or "were," that's a hint you've got passive language. So he's still not smiling, even though, so this was actually very difficult for me to write because it's in passive language. So this is much clearer. See, passive language needs more words than active language. That's very clear. Many more words are required for passive language than for active language. I mean, this also has less energy, right? It's heavier. Here he's smiling. Active language is accountable and concise. It draws your readers in. So it's not creating an unfriendly distance. It's got more white space. It's positively worded. It's friendly, and you know who does what. Okay, we're going to talk about trash. Take out the trash. So there are many, many cases of extra wordy disposable phrases that we all write in our first drafts. And I forget who I was talking to a couple of weeks ago, but if you don't know, if you think that you have no trash in your writing, you haven't looked hard enough, because all writers are going to have trash. So the cat that was spying in my window is looking at the mouse. Yes. So concise language is easier to read. So take the time to take out the trash. So I want to emphasize that point. I don't know if you can tell that I want to emphasize that point here, but yes, it takes more time and effort to write in plain language. So the writer spends the time, so the reader does not have to spend the time. So what you do is you write the first draft, and the first draft has trash, it has passive language, it has extra words that you don't really need, it has places you can put bullet lists, and then you, the writer, go back and spend the extra time, and then your readers are going to be happier. So each of these can be replaced with just one word, except for one of them, that's two words. So take out your pencil and give this a try. Is there a recommendation on word count? Well, here's what I can tell you about short sentences and word count. This is for Carol's question. One word, no. So the average word count of writing these days is 8 words per sentence. And so it's best if you can keep them shorter. So in Chaucer's time in 1300 or the 1300s, like say 1380, the writing in the medieval times was typically 82 words per sentence, which is about 10 lines of text. And obviously that included, semicolons, and it was pretty difficult to read. So it's going to depend also on your content. So some scientific content, you just need longer sentences to explain what's going on. It doesn't mean you're adding extra words, but sometimes it just does take more words per sentence to understand what's going on. Are you done your quiz yet? Can I give the answers? Here's the answers. So a certain number of is some. A considerable amount of is much. A considerable number of is many. A decreased amount of is less. And a decreased number of is fewer. So much, many, less, and fewer are words that a lot of people mix up. Accounted for by the fact that is because, and an adequate amount of just means enough. And when we're looking at them here on this one little PowerPoint slide, it probably seems absolutely ridiculous that we would use the ones on the left-hand side. But I have read so many scientific papers that are just loaded with those phrases on the left-hand side. And so there's a number of strategies that you can use to reduce the wordiness of your documents. So part of what you can do to reduce it is you can just look. So if I notice that somebody's using a considerable number of quite often, I'll go and search through it. And sometimes I'll find 17 examples of that and I'll change them all to many, or I'll, revise the sentence. I might not change them all to the same thing. But so seeing these patterns, now that you've noticed that there can be patterns, I encourage you to go look at something that you've written, the longer the document, the better, and see what you can find out for verbal tics and see if you can replace some of them. So, and if you actually just put wordy phrases in the Google, you will get many lists of wordy phrases. And now that you know that you can go find and annihilate them, it's not that difficult to do. So here's a quick little recap before we do our last quiz. And so the first thing for concise writing is you need to pique interest. So if you just have a brief paragraph, but it's not very interesting, that's not going to induce people to keep reading your email, right? Using a table or using an image is a good idea. Select some specific details rather than being vague. Take out the trash. Gamify it. So if you can make some sort of game in the image, or sometimes you can even make a game by throwing down a challenge in the paragraph that's interesting. Like say, as you read this document, can you find XYZ? And that will encourage people to read the document. Make follow-up easy because that will build trust with your readers. Be plain and be simple. So here's a safety example. It's a bad safety example. I would like you to take a few minutes, like 3 minutes, and not type in the chat and just try to figure out what you could do to make this more concise. So I'll be quiet for a second. I'm interested to see what you thought of doing. Here's what I would first suggest that you would do if you were facing this at work. And by the way, I have seen these in a company. Some frustrated manager just sat down and wrote down a stream of consciousness, all of their frustrations with safety on the site, and they came up with that. So first thing is, let's highlight all the words that we actually need, which as you can see are like maybe 30% of the words. And then the next thing is to figure out the blue words are reasons. So sometimes in safety notices, you do want to tell people what the reasons are for the safety. And other times you just want them to be safe and you just write it in an authoritative way. So the first thing I did was, it was called safety example, but usually on site people know that it's called health and safety rules. And then I figured out that there's 2 categories here. One of the categories is attire. So what are your health and safety attire? And the second category is fatigue. So this is just written in very authoritative styles. And by the way, I also changed the title to be even more concise. So site rules, health and safety. Okay, so on this site, we might even name the site in some of these notices. So attire at all times, steel-toed work boots, hard hat, reflective vest. Prevent fatigue, danger, absolutely no alcohol or drugs. Here's the maximum hours required by the union, and take those breaks. So maybe this manager was noticing that people were becoming exhausted. If they're operating machinery on the whole day, then it can be very dangerous to not take your breaks and stop looking, just get away from the sound of the engine for a little while. So it can be, this isn't messing around and telling people why they have to do it. It's just saying, do it, with a little bit of prevent fatigue danger in there. But it's a lot more effective than this whiny version of, people complain about it, but you just have to follow these rules. Saying that is not a very effective management strategy anyways, and it makes more words that people aren't going to read. So that's all I have to say in this one. I think Marnie has a last slide that she puts up, but if people want to ask some questions. Oh yes, illustration, definitely illustrations on safety notices. I'm a big fan of that. Oh, and other people mentioned photos.
Krista, as you're looking through the chat for questions that are coming up, I want to open up the floor to you to answer the questions. But before everybody does have to sign off, I just want everyone to join me in thanking Krista for another excellent information-filled presentation. So thank you, Krista, for another great webinar. I'm really looking forward to the 2 upcoming ones. So I'll pass it over to you to start answering some of these great questions coming into the chat here.
Somebody was also saying that they're going to break up with the semicolon and fall in love with plain language, and that really warms my heart. So thank you. Can you give effective use of semicolons and colons? Again, that's a really big topic. Effective uses of semicolons is when you need to connect two pieces of logic, but as I said, you can usually take those apart.
There's a question from a long time ago. Can you ever use the semicolon in plain language? With a sigh.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, sometimes you do need to connect two ideas. It's just that often, like most, usually, I'd say 90% of cases, you can take it into 2 sentences without losing something. But I don't delete every single semicolon that I see. Some of them are really important. Now, somebody asked, isn't passive language recommended for scientific writing? And the answer is no. It used to be, and people think that that is true. But so there's actually a really, the subtleties of, I'm writing it in the chat right now, the subtleties of scientific style is written by Matthew Stevens. He's an Australian guy, he's retired now. But if you type this into the internet, you can just download his PDF for free. And he has a really good discussion of scientific language and whether it needs to be in passive language. So if you look at journal style guides, actually, most of the scientific journals are moving more and more towards active language, not passive language. There's still a few, mostly that are out of Britain, that are holding on to passive language as a style, but most of the journals in the States, I was going to say almost all, but I'll just say most, have gone to a more active scientific style. And one of the reasons for that is that it's more accountable. So we know who's doing the research. Is there a preference on sentences per paragraph? 1 sentence per paragraph. I do like 1 sentence per paragraph sometimes. I would say if every single paragraph was only 1 sentence, that probably wouldn't wash with most materials. And again, it's going to depend on what you're writing. If you're writing in scientific journals and it's in columns, of course, a column of text becomes really long if you've put 8 sentences into the paragraph.
Can you please comment on how to reduce or eliminate IE and EG?
I wouldn't eliminate them because EG is an example of, and id est is this means that. And so sometimes you need those things. So, I mean, you could eliminate the E dot G dot by using the words for example, but I wouldn't eliminate using examples. So you could use it by saying, for example, and then you could get rid of IE by saying that is to mean that. Of course, that's 4 words instead of 2 letters. So, you could choose whether you think that's a good idea or not. So I have a list of passive versus active words. Um, the key is the to be verbs. So the same verbs can be either passive or active. And the basic difference is that when it's in the active voice, you know who is acting. When you have the cake was being baked, we don't know who is baking the cake. If we say dad was baking the cake, then that's active because we know dad was doing it. A lot of job sites will have a history of one company works on it and then another company works on it for 5 years and then another company works on it for another 10 years. And if everybody was using the passive voice, it's really hard to track down the history of who did what. And so that's why it's very important to make sure that you're using the active voice and saying, our technical team, name the people who went out and did that field work, name your actors. And then when somebody's trying to trace the path back, they're able to go and see what was actually happening and who did what. Okay, does technical editing and writing overlap sometimes? Yes, definitely. And actually, when I was in the at one Editors Association of Canada conference that I think we had in Ottawa or Montreal, they said, okay, somebody put up their hands. Who does only editing as a career? And I think there were 1 or 2 people that do only editing. Almost everybody does editing and writing. And so that question about what's the name of the career for making writing more concise is usually either a technical writer or an editor. And so if you want more resources about that, there's a number of really great editors associations around the world. There's the Indian Association of Editors in India. There's the Editors Association of Canada. Of course, there's the Copy Editors Association.
I think we will sign off now. And just another thank you to Krista. Absolutely wonderful presentation, and I really appreciate the engagement and the dialogue from everybody. Feel free to reach out following the webinars, and remember to visit our website to get the recordings. I will also send an email to everybody through Eventbrite. So if you've registered for the event, you'll also get that link with everything just as a follow-up to make sure people have access to it. And feel free to share these widely with your colleagues and friends, as they are free and they will be on our website. People can access at any time, because I think, as we can see by the participation here, these are important topics, practical tips that you can use and apply in your careers and in your lives. So thank you again all for joining, and thanks again, Krista. Really appreciate it.